In this lesson, we need to reset our low poly mesh. Alright, so I went ahead and I baked out a normal map, and then I also baked out an ambient occlusion map, which is pretty simple to do. I mean, once you have all the cages and you're ready to bake it, all you have to do is add in a skylight into the scene. And once the skylight has been added, okay, now if you don't know where skylights are, you can find that under Create, Lights, Standard Lights, and then Skylight. You'll need to select the high poly meshes, so make sure you select your high poly, and then you'll want to go to your material editor, and you want to put on just a standard white material. So just add a standard, change its diffuse color to white, and then you'll assign that to the high poly mesh. And then you'll go to Render Setup and go to Advanced Lighting and turn on this light tracer. And then what that will do is that will create those nice soft shadows on your ambient occlusion mesh. So whenever you have your low poly mesh selected and you go ahead and you bake that out, so if you go to your render to texture, you'll just want to go ahead and add in another map. I usually just use the complete map and then rename it as AO, and then you'll render both of those out. So I've done that in between lessons just to kind of speed things along. You know how to do that at this point. It's pretty simple. So now what we need to do is we need to bring our low poly mesh back together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and knock this back down to 0. Okay, and you'll notice that our high poly mesh has come in. Let's go ahead and actually turn off the advanced lighting stuff. So I'm going to make that on active, set it to no plugin, yes, close that, and also get rid of this skylight. Okay, I'm going to leave it in 67_begin in case you want to see how that's set up there. Okay, so now that we have all of these objects, we need to detach them and put them back in their place. So thinking about how I want this to work, I only want the objects that are going to be animated or possibly be animated to be separate objects. So like this key lock here, let me go ahead and go to element mode. And actually, seeing how we're done baking, let's go ahead and convert it to editable poly. And I'm going to take the key lock object under element mode, and I'm just going to move it back into position. I'm going to position it right over the high poly mesh. Okay. Now this would be a lot harder if we had lots and lots of different pieces, but seeing how we don't, we could just place it right here. Now you just have to get close, okay, obviously. And then we're going to take the trigger and we're going to detach it. It's not part of the frame, so we'll just detach. Let's give it a name, and we'll call it LP_trigger. Okay, because again, it could have the possibility of being animated. I'm also going to set my hierarchy and my effect pivot. I'm going to center that to the object, and then you may also want to come in and reset its pivot to around like where it should pivot, like in the animation. Okay, so just roughly, and then turn off effect pivot only. Put that into position here, so it should just kind of overlap like that. Do the same thing with your trigger. We want to go to element mode, select it, and we'll detach it from the frame and give it a name, LP_trigger. Or not trigger, excuse me. We want that to be LP_hammer. Okay. And again, let's effect pivot only, center to the object, and then in my left view, I'm just going to position that pivot point around where it's probably going to pivot. So somewhere right around here. It's usually kind of along the back side there. So we'll put it right around in here. And then we'll position that on the weapon. So we'll try to cover that high poly mesh as much as possible. Okay, and that looks about right. This is the only downside to using the explode. Now let's go ahead and go back to element, select the crane, and we want to detach that, LP_crane, hit enter, and then let's center to object, effect pivot only, center to object, and then also let's make sure that we put this, let's go down to our front view or back view, whichever we want to use, and we want to put this right down here at the bottom. So it's going to swivel around a point here, okay, and then we'll turn that off. Okay. Now this can be adjusted by the animator if they need it to be in a different position. So I'm just going to put this right up against our game mesh, somewhere right in here. Okay, good. There we go. All right, looks like maybe that even came up a little bit. We can probably try to lower that. We've already baked it out, so just get it into the right position on the game res mesh as much as possible. So yeah, if it's a little off, you can make adjustments to that. All right, and then finally the cylinder. Let's also affect its pivot. We'll center that onto, oops, let's not do that. We need to take the cylinder off, of course. So element mode and detach. It's going to be LP underscore cylinder. Hit enter. And then select that. And then we'll go ahead and affect pivot only centered object. The pivot point, I'm going to leave it right in the center of it all. And then I'll just position it back over the object here. Now you can go ahead and set its X value to 0 on that, because that's right where it needs to be anyway. All right, so all of those are now positioned. We've got everything where it needs to be. We've got our low poly mesh all ready to go. Let's go ahead and just isolate that. Oops, it looks like part of that disappeared. So now what we need to do is we need to actually select our high poly mesh. Let's right click and hide that, hide selection. And then what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll select all of these and make that part of my low poly. Let's see here. Let's do this. We're going to add these to our low poly. So I'm going to select this guy, select low poly, and we'll add and add. And then we'll add that. So now I should be able to go ahead and go to the low poly selection, and it should have everything. Oops, we forgot the trigger. So low poly, select it, select your trigger, add that. Perfect. Okay, so there is your low poly weapon. We can go ahead and add the normal map to that, the ambient occlusion to that. Let's just see what it looks like while we're here. Let's go ahead and go to materials, and we could choose any one of these if we really wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these materials here. I'm going to delete those out because they can pose some issues. Now we have our UV material still. It's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just add in a new standard material and double click on that. And let's go ahead and add a diffuse color map. We're going to go ahead and go to bitmap. And on this one, we're going to grab our revolver AO. And then we'll double click on our bump. We'll use a normal bump. Then we'll click on the normal here. Use a bitmap. We'll use the revolver normal map. And then select that. Let's go to our maps. Let's make sure bump is set to 100. Select the weapon. Okay, and you can actually select all the pieces. And with all of those selected, go ahead and assign, show map and viewport. And then let's also go ahead and go to realistic, materials with maps, and that'll show you your normal map. And there is your game res mesh with all of its normal maps. And in my personal opinion, I think that turned out really, really well. So good job if you have succeeded. If you are still having some issues, try to work through those, maybe rewatch a couple of the lessons, try to figure that out. Hopefully you've succeeded in this, and hopefully I've explained that pretty well. So I'm really happy with the way that looks. Now it's time to texture this thing, get this thing looking as good as possible. Now we're going to be using a PBR workflow, and this is going to be a little bit different than normal or previous workflows that you may be used to. Seeing how we're moving into the next generation of games, we have different types of maps that we need to take care of. So we're thinking about using these textures and we want to bring those into something like Unreal Engine 4. There are map slots on those materials that require metalness. There are roughness maps that we'll need and things like that. And so we're going to go through that workflow, creating our textures. Let's start by creating our diffuse texture next.